What if I told you that America's oldest and arguably most prestigious university has an emeritus professor who was named in the Epstein files a minimum of 137 times? And what if I told you that federal and state law require Harvard to do something about the fact that this guy has run of the campus and access to not a few minors? And what if I told you that the university refuses to do so, but is not being punished by the federal government for that, but actually for not being nice enough to the Epstein circle? Oh, it's all true. All that and worse. Things are always several steps worse than you imagine that they might be. My name's Chris, and on this channel, I remember things because someone has to. I've been up to my neck in filth for the last couple of weeks looking into the career and life and defenses and associations of Alan Dershowitz, who I may also refer to as Uncle Tickles because fuck that guy. In the first video in this three-part series, I took a look at his pattern of behavior as regards people convicted of sex crimes, and especially those crimes that are aimed at underaged individuals. There's a long history of that. We took a look at the editorial that he wrote in 1997, arguing for the lowering of the age of consent to at least 14 with no top end for the other sexual partner, or who knows, partners. We can slap an S on there. God knows what the guy's into. I don't know what Uncle Tickles is doing at any given time. And in part two, there is so much malfeasance by this guy, and so many reasons that Harvard needs to strip him of his title and boot him off campus. I've actually had to come up with two separate videos, one that's going to deal with the sexual abuse and trafficking allegations, and another one that's going to deal with the plagiarism. So that'll be part 3 of the triptych, and then I can finally wash my hands of this creep, hopefully forever. Dershowitz is an emeritus professor of law at Harvard. He's arguably the most famous lawyer in the United States, which tells us all we need to know about the law profession. And where most people start and end any accusations connected to him would be with Virginia Giuffre, who for some of these purposes is also known as Virginia Roberts, because like everybody else in this series of videos, she changed her name. Have that on your bingo card. And where most people start is with her, because she was forced into an agreement in which she signed a statement which is usually as a filthy lie in order to protect Epstein and the Epstein class and everything connected to the Israel lobby. That is usually phrased as her recanting. And that is very far from what happened. But we'll get to that at the end of this series of witnesses whose testimony came up repeatedly in both attempted criminal prosecution of Epstein and his circle and in civil cases against the same group. So there are multiple people here that you don't usually hear about. And then I'm going to get to Virginia Giuffre because I think that frames things better to understand what was done to her. And I think that will take a lot of the wind out of the sails of these anti-woman edgelords, Michael Tracy, who seem to delight in the idea that this poor woman recanted. Between the years 2005 and 2009, there were 2 Palm Beach household employees of Epstein who gave sworn testimony in police interviews, also in depositions and affidavits. And one of them was named Juan Alessi. And Alessi, who was a housekeeper for Epstein's Palm Beach mansion until roughly 2002, said that Dershowitz visited Epstein's Florida mansion, quote unquote, pretty often, quote, at least 4 or 5 times a year, minimum, 4 or 5 times a year. that he also, quote, got massages while he was there, and, quote, had massages sometimes when he was there. This person, Juan Alessi, also testified that on some or all of those occasions, Virginia, who is also known in some of these documents as Jane Doe number 3, was present at the mansion at the same time that Dershowitz was. Okay, so you almost never hear that name Juan Alessi, and you almost never hear that context for her testimony. Next, we have somebody named Alfredo Rodriguez, who is a household manager, again, at the Florida mansion, and he had testimony which is covering an overlapping period. He testified that Dershowitz was at the mansion at times when underage girls were giving quote-unquote massages. Now, Alfredo Rodriguez also says that Dershowitz showed up alone, that means without his family, when young girls were at the home, that he usually stayed by the pool with wine and did not go upstairs where much of the sexual activity allegedly occurred. So he's just relaxing by the pool with his Manischewitz, and the background, the extras from Eyes Wide Shut are doing their thing in the background, but God knows he would have nothing to do with that. Dershowitz admits visiting as a friend and legal advisor. And what was he advising on? He was largely advising on how to commit statutory rape in various jurisdictions and get away with it. That's a lot of what we also know from the Epstein files that he spent time advising upon. And he was staying overnight, which suggests to me, did he stay overnight by the pool? Is that how that happened? He just slept outside on a beach chair by the pool, didn't go inside, wasn't upstairs, wasn't in the okay. And once borrowed the entire house for a family vacation. Now there are also numerous flight logs of the Lolita Express which show him on Epstein's plane traveling to the Palm Beach area multiple times. There are also apparently some entries in which it's not clear where he's headed, but he's on Epstein's plane, where we know that many of these girls were also exploited. As far as being at Epstein's New York mansion, we have another employee named Maria Farmer. Maria Farmer was a front door employee at the New York mansion, the Manhattan mansion of Epstein. She testified that she saw Dershowitz there, quote unquote, several times, and he was, quote unquote, very comfortable. That he walked in and he did go upstairs. Oh! He did go upstairs when girls under 18 were also upstairs, is what Maria Farmer says. And Dershowitz, for his part, says that he was visiting the mansion for social and intellectual discussions. That is the synopsis which I have seen. Social and intellectual discussions, which require going upstairs with, 16 or 17-year-old females. Who knows? Maybe some of these 16-year-olds had been reading up on interesting case law recently, and the good professor was like, "Oh, do you have any opinions on how they're interpreting Escobedo v. Illinois these days, there, Candy?" As far as Little St. James Island, which would be the statutory rape island at the U.S. Virgin Islands, which we know that Epstein maintained largely for those purposes, Giuffre says that she had encounters with Epstein there, and Dershowitz has long denied visiting the island for improper reasons. You wouldn't want to take the Lolita Express airplane to statutory rape island and do the wrong things. In January of 2024, during a live stream, Dershowitz said that he had been to the island one time with his wife and his daughter, and at a time when no young people were present. There were no young people. I don't know, first off, when you hit 60 or 70, I don't know what your definition of young people is. And I'm not sure how you know that there aren't any young people present on an island. According to public flight logs, which were entered into evidence in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. Now, first off, something to know about Ghislaine Maxwell is that Maxwell is not her surname, and Robert Maxwell, who is a hero in Israel, was not her father's name. That these are people who, like everybody else, changed their names and kind of washed their identities to seem Anglo. but are in fact from an Ashkenazi Jewish background, and in this case from Central Europe, and huge supporters of Israel. Robert Maxwell, long considered to have been working in espionage capacities for the state of Israel. Dershowitz flew on Epstein's plane several times between the years 1998 and 2005, at least that we know of. Could have been before then, could have been after then, and at least that many times, but the available excerpts do not list exactly where he landed all of the time. So he could have been on the island very well, way more frequently than he is claiming. Dershowitz, for his part, also claims that he got one massage one time. And he says that this was done by an Eastern European woman named Olga, and that he did not enjoy it. Did not enjoy it. I don't know how or in what context. A lot of these people seem not to be able to place things or remember specific people or remember seeing anybody. But he remembers that this woman was named Olga. Perhaps he asked her name, and in a background voice, she said, Olga, O-L-G-A, Olga, O-O-O, Olga. And he says that he did not enjoy the massage. So you have to picture we're meant to think he's emphasizing the age, middle-aged. How old is she? She could be, I don't know, it's connected to Jeffrey Epstein. So she's probably in her mid-50s. And she's pressing down on Dershowitz, who says he kept his underwear on too. This is another thing. Dershowitz never lies. Says he kept his tighty whities on, or maybe he's a boxer man. I don't know. Kept them on and was not enjoying it when Olga was massaging him. And we can imagine that Olga was saying, oh, little lawyer man, you have knots in muscles. You have knots in your muscles from stress, from defending child molesters in many, many states. Let Olga push out the stress from little lawyer man. And he's saying, oh God, no, please make it stop. Now, he also says that his wife paid for this massage, and he has one or more canceled checks to prove that, because of course, this is a normal arrangement. You get a massage, your wife pays for it, and she pays with it. Olga apparently takes personal checks. I don't know if Olga has to check two forms of photo ID first to take the check, or if she's a very trusting person. The last I remember a lot of use of personal checks, I remember my mother would sometimes buy groceries in, let's say, around 1991, when this was already considered a little bit of an old technology. And you at the supermarket, you had to go to the little desk with the manager, the little plexiglass area, and you'd have to get a card, membership card that would allow you to cash a personal check at the supermarket. And this would typically you'd have to show a couple forms of ID and wait for the approval. And then in the future, at the cash register, while the other people were paying cash behind you or using a credit card were glaring at you, you could take out your checkbook and write a check like it was 1897. That I remember my mother doing that, and that being considered old-fashioned 35 years ago. Now, Dershowitz was also part of Jeffrey Epstein's legal counsel team. I don't believe usually his lead counsel, but we are aware of the fact that Epstein was going to be charged with a variety of federal and state charges for trafficking underage people for sex purposes, for engaging in sexual contact with underage people. The usual number of charges that I see that he was probably facing, I've seen a lot of references to 67 or 68 charges, and certainly he would have spent life in prison. You could argue if he is in fact dead, that's exactly what turned out happening in a sense. But you were looking at multiple lifetimes worth of charges. And what happened was not because Dershowitz is such a wonderful lawyer. I think we need I attacked this notion somewhat in the first video, but I think we have to attack it more. The Epstein charges got busted down to 2 counts of paying for sex with an underage woman who was underage by literally about 12 hours one time in Florida. And he got this sweetheart deal of house arrest in his mansion, and I think it's technically West Palm Beach. And this was clearly the result of the government not trying. This was clearly the result of the prosecution not using the extensive amount of evidence that they had built up and letting this guy off the hook. And I really don't think the fact that Dershowitz had attached himself to that and was in this circle and was in fact ultimately also defending himself as a co-conspirator in a lot of this, because he was also named in some of the testimony as being one of the recipients of these happy ending massages at minimum from underage females. We need to make it clear the government really didn't try. And it seems that Epstein had major connections, was connected to not only the financial world in a big way, but to Israeli intelligence, perhaps to American or other intelligences, and was very much let off the hook. Okay? What this resulted in was a court case against the government for improper prosecution by a couple of lawyers named Counsel and Edwards, who were maintaining that many of these victims were not having their experiences, their victimhood, and the crimes committed against them recognized or prosecuted by the government in this plea deal. And that was deeply harmful to their clients in a lot of ways. It does not give them justice. It doesn't give the general public justice. It doesn't give people closure. It's an improper, abusive use of the prosecutorial offices and is not the way that you should be doing law. In gathering testimony for that case from numerous victims, you get the Virginia Giuffre, I will use the name Giuffre, testimony that she was attacked, that would have been at her age statutory raped by Dershowitz a minimum of 5 or 6 times. And she says that this happened at Epstein's New Mexico ranch, which was called the Zorro Ranch, that it happened at the Manhattan apartments that Epstein kept, that it happened in Florida, that it happened at effectively the U.S. Virgin Islands, and that it happened on an airplane. I've had to do a dive on all sorts of law regarding things that I wish I didn't know, and one of my questions was, what are the statutes of limitations, both in federal law and in state law, regarding what is alleged to have happened? Would it have been possible? Because Giuffre was testifying that these are things that happened to her roughly in the years 2000, 2001, and 2002. And then she was testifying about the inappropriateness of the plea deal in 2016. You're dealing with multiple jurisdictions. And it turns out that in most cases, you have 2 different varieties. You have some of the conspiratorial stuff, you have some of the trafficking charges, and then you have some of the straight up statutory rape charges because of the ages of the victims involved. And so there are different crimes, there are different jurisdictions, but for the most part, in 2016, the states and the federal government wanted to, they could have reopened these for prosecution. They did not. We have all been failed horribly by that. But those claims sent Dershowitz into his usual mode of suing everybody. I'm going to sue everybody. He's going to sue everybody for defamation, and he's going to go after people to try and shut them up. Once again, as I stated in the first video, this is a guy who is presented to the country as one of our leading civil libertarians, but who is always attempting to use the courts and use money and use threats to shut people up and to keep them from publishing things. So you get into the weeds of court cases off of court cases, where you start to get civil cases here. Now that's another thing. This could also have opened Dershowitz up to civil liability, meaning that he could be sued for money as well. Although the testimony that Giuffre and others provided for the purposes of this initial case here were not for money at all. They were just trying to seek some justice and trying to get the federal government, especially, to do its freaking job and prosecute people who are running a sex trafficking operation of minors. The order in which things happen is basically that Dershowitz goes on to media and calls them liars, tears down her reputation, attacks the lawyers, says that the lawyers should be disbarred for bringing such a case in front of the courts, that they are incompetent, that she and others are liars, but he's especially focused on her. He's especially focused on Virginia because unlike the others who place him with the underage girls, she's the one saying, I was personally the victim. Her lawyers say, okay, at this point, you have a civil case against this turd, and we need to shut him the fuck up. So they seek on her behalf alone $75,000 in damages from Dershowitz for impugning her character. That's pretty much chump change for a lot of the people that are involved here. I don't think that Dershowitz would miss $75,000, honestly. His problem is that if she's believed, if these other people are believed, but especially her, she's in a position to provide testimony to multiple states and the U.S. Virgin Islands and the federal government. And I have to say the federal government twice over, not just for their botched investigation of a sex trafficking ring, but also if you abuse a minor on an airplane, that is a federal offense by itself, and there is no statute of limitations for that, in case you were wondering. So that's the order. They sue Dershowitz. Dershowitz countersues them for an open-ended amount that would be a jury award. It could be tremendous. And what he is claiming is, I'm this famous guy. I'm a best-selling author. I'm a Harvard law professor. That if you ruin my reputation, or if we claim that you have ruined my reputation, then there's going to be extensive damages. There could be damages. A jury could award millions or tens of millions of dollars to Dershowitz from her lawyers and from her. And Virginia Giuffre, having been a sex traffic victim, is having a tough life here. Rough paper route. She's having a tough time of it. She, unlike Dershowitz, doesn't have $75,000. She doesn't have $750,000. She doesn't have $7.5 million or $75 million. This is the level of pressure that's now on her and her co-defendants. This goes back and forth through the courts, and one of the things that her lawyers, Castle and Edwards, are complaining about constantly, including to the press, is that this is a distraction. This is a sideshow. Now we're throwing up smoke. We're distracting you from these people that you've got 7 or 8 co-defendants of Epstein that are named, and these files, none of whom, which are now censored to us, that we've seen in redacted from what we've seen of the Epstein files. We're not talking about them. We're not talking about going after him or anybody properly. We're not talking about Ghislaine Maxwell facing the music that she should actually be facing. We're not talking about what this is connected to larger in the big picture. We're now having he said, she said, played out in civil court for money. And this is actually by itself is already part of the Dershowitz defense, because we're just going to squid ink this and make it a he said, she said between she and him, with the stakes being somebody's going to lose a ton of money. This keeps going until 2022. And like most cases in America, and I am going to do a video upcoming about how really there aren't trials anymore in the United States. That about 98% of criminal trials and 97% or so of civil trials end up in plea deals. Whatever you're taught in, having a model jury in school or whatever, throw that out the window. That's almost never happening in the United States. It's rare when it does. And so this goes to arbitration of a form, and as a result, to drop things. And because it's been dragging on for years, Virginia Giuffre and her lawyers agree to mutually drop their suits back and forth with Dershowitz. A big thing that Dershowitz and the Epstein circle want here are for her to drop her claims because it leaves him open to prosecution in multiple jurisdictions. According to her testimony from her 2016 deposition, Epstein encouraged her to perform oral sex on Dershowitz in a limousine. She had intercourse with Dershowitz on the plane while another young woman trafficked by Epstein was also present. Sexual activity occurred in Epstein's bedroom at one of his homes. She says on one occasion, Dershowitz watched her having sex with Epstein. Afterwards, she cleaned both men with a warm washcloth. She claimed to have seen Dershowitz also having sex with at least one other young woman who was also described as blonde and whom she suspected was also underage. She described Dershowitz as comfortable in the environment where, quote, there was always young girls around a lot, and she told a friend she considered him a pedophile, quote, unquote. In 2022, after years of being dragged through the mud, after years of struggling, apparently with ill health and possibly substance abuse, and facing a possible multi-million-dollar lawsuit from Dershowitz, she signed a statement which reads, in part, quote, I now recognize I may have made a mistake in identifying Mr. Dershowitz. And it then, the next sentence goes on to talk about what a horrible trial this has been for her, and how this has been dragging on for years, and it's time for her and for her family to move on. That is what was said. I may have, you have to read between the freaking lines of this. I may have misidentified Dershowitz. I just went through a list of the things that she clearly and distinctly had recollections of in 2016, referring to the period of 2000 to 2002, during which time she would have been between 16 and 18 years old. And that was 14 years earlier to 16 years earlier. So not decades and decades earlier. When she says, I may have made a mistake in identifying Mr. Dershowitz in order to call off the dogs, that is not recanting. Recanting is when you say, I was wrong. I was wrong. That's recanting. He didn't do it. That's recanting. That's not what she said. This is the two sides agreeing to stop saying things about each other so that the litigation stops, right? Which is that side's goal. And she's getting on with her life. That is not recanting. And it's a filthy lie to say it is. What she said, you have to read that between the lines. You have to say, maybe I don't think that I had sexual intercourse and engaged in various other activities in 5 different jurisdictions with Alan Dershowitz. Maybe I got it wrong. Maybe it was Alan Dershowitz or Alan Dershowitz. Who knows? It's all so confusing. You have to take this with a fucking grain of salt. I think that a reasonable actor, a normal person, a reasonable adult with their faculties, let alone people who claim to be the smartest people in America at Harvard University, could look at the testimonies of a minimum of 4 people that placed the guy there. The fact that he's Epstein's lawyer who is advising him on how to get away with having sexual intercourse with people that would be illegal in one state, but how can we move them to another state and make it legal there? He's providing a specific legal remedy for how to do that. And we also have him writing an editorial in 1997 suggesting that we move the age of consent to at least 14, and then goes beyond that and says that, well, is 13 or 12 really then that's so bad? That's not really pedophilia. Maybe we need a sliding scale beyond the age of 14. This was printed in the Los Angeles Times, and he signed his name to it. So you might think then that a reasonable adult, let alone one of the big brains at Harvard University, might then think that this person might not be the best person to have around minors. We should review what a professor emeritus is. A professor emeritus is somebody who had tenure at a university, taught there for a number of years, Depending on the university, there might be a minimal number of years you would have had to have taught there before retiring or semi-retiring. It might be 10 or more years that you were a full professor there, and then get the emeritus title. And this means that you may no longer be teaching regular class, full schedules every year, all of the time. You may teach survey courses here and there. You may teach specialty courses. It may be something that's considered kind of spicy for a hotshot university to have this opportunity where once every year, once every 2 years, this nationally known professor teaches a survey course on a very specific topic that they're an expert in, and that'll get you students, that gets you prestige and all of that other good stuff. An emeritus professor has run of the campus. They may maintain an old office. On a lot of campuses they do. They will have they're going to have a card, probably these days one of those electronic access cards that gets you into all the stuff, gets you into the library system, probably gets you into the gym and the pool, and hey, the locker rooms at the gym and the pool, gets you into the cafeterias. There's, I'm sure, a faculty club at Harvard. The one time in my life that I've been to an Ivy League faculty club, even though I spent 4 years attending the university, didn't do it then, but about a year after, I was doing work for a professor emeritus of the same university. And to thank me, he took me to lunch in the faculty club, where neither one of us at the time, he was no longer a professor there. I was no longer a student there. But, we used his credentials to get me into the faculty and himself into the faculty club. He maintained an office on campus. I was doing research in the library system for him using, at the time, a LexisNexis account, which was the hot thing to have before the World Wide Web, that he had because he was a professor emeritus. You get perks, you get to park without paying, all that good stuff, right? So you're on campus, you're part of campus life, you can host campus events, you can use the facilities, you got run of the place. And this becomes a problem if you're an institution that is also providing services, including housing, to minors. Any given year, I tried looking it up, and they don't publish exact figures, but in a 2020 survey that was made public, the incoming freshman Harvard class was approximately 10.7% under the age of 18. Most of them 17-year-olds. I myself started university at the age of 17. I kind of skipped a year of kindergarten. I was always the youngest person in all of my classes. And I started at my highfalutin rape-positive Ivy League university at the age of 17 and didn't actually turn 18 until the following calendar year, until the spring term is when I turned 18. And that is not 100% rare. An incoming Harvard freshman class has right now about between 1,800 students. And we can expect that about 170 to 200 of them, somewhere in there, are actually 17 when they start. They're minors, legally, they're minors. Some of them might even be younger. There have been Harvard students, as in the modern era, as young as 11 years old. You get some young Sheldons every now and then. There's some kids who actually end up spending their entire time at the university under the age of 18. It's pretty rare. It's less than 1% of the university, but you got minors on campus. I'll also say that Harvard, like most universities, skews female. It is currently 53%, almost 54% admissions are female for undergraduates. The graduate schools skew even heavier female. The education graduate school is nearly 70% female, and the overall number of students, including graduate students at the school, even though most of them are age of majority, they're adults technically, it's about 54% or more female students. So we could say then safely that at any given time there are probably 100 to 120 Harvard freshmen who are females under the age of 18. Look at that, my fancy education. I can do basic math. Now, there are also a lot of other minors on the campus at any given time because during the summer, for example, Harvard has 2-week and 7-week programs for high school students as young as 16, or as Alan Dershowitz looks at it, a year or two too old for the likes of me. What this triggers, or should trigger, are a number of things according to federal and state law. There are also pretty much constant campus tours for students who are thinking of going there. And I mean, Harvard gets inundated with applications. You know, they're going to get 50 or 100 or more applications for every student who's accepted to the school. So there's pretty much constantly high school students around. One of the many, many disturbing things that I read in doing the research for this series of videos was that apparently American colleges and universities have decided in the last 40 or 50 years to move away from the idea that they have in loco parentis responsibilities for literal minors whose parents are renting housing from them when they're away from home. I don't understand how you opt out of that. Is this something that we can all do? Can you and your family decide that you can start trafficking cocaine? Because, we've decided to move away from the drug laws. Part of that has to deal with the fact that 40 and 50 years ago, the age of majority was 21. And there's still some things that we don't let you do until you're 21 in the country, like drink. But basically, there's been a push, and I've heard Camille Paglia and other people point out that this is a rather healthy push, that we should be stating that people who are on a college campus need to behave more like adults because, working class kids are getting married, having families, paying payroll taxes and that sort of thing. They're in the real world. And it's a little bit ridiculous that you've got graduate students who might be 24 or 25 years old who still expect the university to be babying them. And I agree with a lot of that. The problem is, that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about people who may be 16 or 17 years old. They are still minors. And I figured, okay, guy named 137 times, albeit some of those times as counsel, albeit counsel to figure out how to get away with statutory rape. In the most famous investigation in United States history involving trafficking minors, and reporting laws. How are those merging? Harvard, you've got a law school. You have access to a lawyer or two, I understand. The answers are a little more uncomfortable than you would like. For the most part, most of the sets of laws requiring reporting, requiring kicking the guy the hell off of campus, or alerting people to his presence, or that sort of thing, they seem to fall more under norms, guidelines, and suggestions than hard and fast law in many cases. However, it's pretty bad if the university is deciding that they're going to err on the side of having Uncle Tickles walking around campus while you're also hosting a bunch of 16-year-olds in some kind of 7-week program. According to Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972, universities have to respond promptly to actual knowledge of sexual harassment, which can be broadly defined to include sexual exploitation or abuse that could deny equal access to education. And actual knowledge includes notice to officials, to Title IX coordinators, and public allegations do count. And they do count especially if the institution has quote-unquote substantial control over the individual. In other words, if it's somebody with the title of emeritus professor and you can pull their access card so that they can't be in the library bathroom at the same time that a 17-year-old who's technically under your care is, then I think you should be doing that. And that could mean assessing whether the allegations pose a risk to current minors, even if it is historical in nature, which this is. The specific allegations date to as recently as 2002 to 2005, depending on whose testimony that we're talking about. But it doesn't really matter. You don't necessarily want to send your daughter into a situation in which she has to share university space with somebody who swears that he hasn't committed statutory rape in, like 15 years now. So if you ignore known risks under Title IX, that could be considered deliberate indifference, which is, I think, what we've got from Harvard here. We have a great deal of deliberate indifference, and that could lead to liability or funding loss from the federal government. We'll get to that in just a minute. There's also a law called the Clery Act, which is officially the Jean Cleary Disclosure of Campus Security Policy and Campus Crime Statistics Act, which seems to apply more to if the attacks were to have happened on the campus itself. But if allegations indicate a threat, which would include a professor's access to minors, they could issue warnings and coordinate with law enforcement. It sounds to me like it wouldn't be the worst idea if you're going to keep hosting the guy on campus for various events when he feels like showing up, that you could have some kind of klaxon, which is this. Or that you could do the sort of thing that they had laws for the early Model Ts and that sort of thing, where you'd have to have a guy walking in front of you with a lantern and a bell. Hear ye, here comes Uncle Tickles. Hide your daughters, hide yourselves. Here comes Uncle Tickles. There's also the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, or CAPTA. CAPTA funds state programs requiring mandated reporters, which would include university staff or faculty interacting with minors, which is virtually everybody who interacts with undergraduates on Harvard University's campus, to report suspicions of child abuse or exploitation if reasonable cause exists. Now, the assumption there is that it would be happening on campus to one of the students. However, in Massachusetts, because this is a federal law which would be enacted by the states and also is going to reference Massachusetts mandated reporting law, then that would require public allegations could provide cause if it's linked to a current risk. Well, I don't know. I would say that a guy who writes an editorial in the Los Angeles Times saying that it should be okay to have sex with a 14-year-old could be a risk to a 17-year-old. Just saying. The United States Department of Education also has guidance. There's no guidance on faculty who might be involved with child trafficking allegations, because I guess they figured that wouldn't come up. But general Title IX or Clery rules apply. There's a 2021 DOE updated guide on trafficking in schools that urges educators to identify and report risks, including for higher education. So maybe somebody on the Harvard campus has to grow a pair and say, I don't want Uncle Tickles near the kids in my charge. Effectively, Harvard opens itself, if nothing else, to civil liability from students and their families who could say, I send my daughter to your school. She's not 18 yet. And you've got this chucklefuck walking around who seems to have spent a lot of time on statutory rape island. I had a comment from one of you, and thank you for your... I do read and try to respond to all of your comments to these videos. Thank you for that. I had a comment from a viewer who said, well, Dershowitz would sue. And my thing is, well, who gives a fuck? Because Harvard University has an endowment, as we're about to get into, that's worth almost $60 billion. I think he's bluffing, first of all, or would be bluffing if they were to revoke his status and take away his tenure and his emeritus professorship, which the university could easily do, because he doesn't want to go into discovery. He doesn't want to be deposed for hours on end as to how creepy he's been when he was hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein on Creeper Island and on the Lolita Express and in a couple of other locations. He doesn't want to be. That makes things worse for him. Fighting only makes it tighter. So I don't think that he wants to enter into that. I think that would be a big old fucking bluff. But let's say that we went ahead with that, and let's say he won. Let's say that Alan Dershowitz won the mother of all lawsuits. He won the biggest award that's ever been awarded for any of this sort of thing in the history of history. Let's say that he were awarded $50 billion. That would mean that Harvard would still be sitting on at least $10 billion. And given their annual expenses, their budget of $2 to $2.5 billion, and given how fast their endowment makes money, currently the Harvard endowment, I was working it out for the third video in the series that's coming up. I'll get into this more then. But the Harvard endowment earns $1 million in just under 2 hours right now, passively, by Harvard doing nothing other than reaping the rewards of its investments. Some days it's going to be a little more, some days it's going to be a little less, but it averages through the year at about $1 million in, an hour, 45 minutes, multiple times a day, every day, 12 months a year. So he wins $50 billion, and the fact of the matter is that nobody at Harvard is actually going to notice. But I don't think he's going to win, because I think that a university saying that somebody who has this pattern of behaviors in history being barred from campus access, where we also have all of these laws stating that we have a responsibility to protect the minors who are on our campus, especially the entire university community, really, particularly the women, but especially the minors. I don't see them being found at fault, and I really don't think that whatever pittance, if it dragged on forever and it got to a point where there was some sort of settlement, I think that the pittance that would be given to make this piece of shit go away forever would not be noticed by Harvard at all. You might be wondering how much money exactly. This is a private institution, quote unquote, and like virtually every other private institution in America, whether it is a for-profit or technically a non-profit, and in this case, Harvard's a 501c3. Either way, typically when you're talking about it being private, what that means is that there's privatized control of what are very much publicly provided assets, and Harvard is the freaking poster child for this. I hope you're sitting down for this, because you're about to learn how much money that you as the taxpayer are providing to an institution that has, the last I saw, an estimated $56.9 billion endowment that they're sitting on. They also own about $13 billion worth of real estate. In the fiscal year 2024, and there's a reason we're going back to that year I'll get to in a moment, Harvard received between an estimated $600 and $700 million in federal taxpayer money for supportive research funding. That is, in other words, less than 1/60th of the amount that Harvard already has on hand in its private funds. The National Institutes of Health alone provided $488 million. We don't actually know. It's such a large amount of money that we've narrowed it down to a $100 million range per year. Total federal research sponsorship made it about 11 to 16% of Harvard's operating revenue. And this includes grants, contracts, reimbursements, multiple year commitments. We're in the billions. There looks to be $60 to $100 million of contracts that the federal government has with Harvard to provide services or consulting. This is not grants for research, but is actually consulting fees, probably to do something horrible like turn babies into leather pouches. I'm kidding. I'm sure it's worse than that. Now, there are also, that's not where it stops. If you think that's how much you're on the hook for, it's always steps worse. Harvard's endowment receives it has tax-exempt status. So with the endowment earnings, there's an estimated $300 to $500 million annually in exemptions that are lost to the public for what would be collected as corporate capital gains taxes and other similar taxes. So when you look at that, and you also look at the massive amount of real estate tax exemption that they get, it's safe to say that in an average year, Harvard is receiving between $900 million and $1 billion annually in supports, in tax breaks, in grants, and in direct contracts from the federal taxpayer alone, and that this is added to by the monies that are provided by Massachusetts taxpayers. I won't go into the detail. And by the monies that are provided and the supports that are given by Cambridge and Boston taxpayers to the institution as well. So, we could say, first off, maybe the public should be a little bit more angry about what happens at these, private institutions that have their hand firmly ensconced in your pocket. The hope there would be that Title IX and other things would kick in if you don't kick Dershowitz off of campus and others. He's not the only one. In the third video, we're going to go into the other creepers in the Epstein circle who are also recipients of the taxpayer largesse via Harvard. But you would hope there would be this switch you could pull where you could say, okay, you bastards, if you're not going to keep this creeper off your campus and away from the kids, then we're going to hit this button and you're going to lose $900 million to $1 billion per year. And the federal government under the Trump administration is restricting the money that they're giving to Harvard. They have tried to pull the plugs on, depending on what I read, $2.2 to $2.5 billion given to Harvard, because they are allegedly mean to Israel. Yes, Alan Dershowitz and Epstein and all of his buddies who are all connected. The Epstein thing is this big financial crime, sex crime, bribery, blackmail opportunity operation that is very clearly connected to Israeli intelligence at minimum. And everybody involved in the Epstein files who is also involved at Harvard is also very much involved in providing rhetorical support, in providing material support, legal advice, and perhaps even espionage information to the state of Israel. Basically, it's Harvard and Israel sitting in a tree, KISSING, probably with a minor. But there were protests, acute protests around the Gaza genocide starting in 2023. And as a result of this, there was a crackdown by the Trump administration on campuses which, quote unquote, allowed, in other words, read and understood the text of the First Amendment, campuses to have any sort of protest against Israel. And what has happened is what the Trump administration did was weaponize the monies that are given by the federal government to institutions that allowed students to protest and basically held it over them that we're going to pull funding, which in some universities' cases would be a significant amount of their operating funds, unless you start to cooperate with us to shut down campus protests, to kick BDS off of your campus, and in some cases even help us detain and deport students who may be in the United States on visas. So that's what's going on. Effectively, Harvard has been involved for a couple of years now in an ongoing legal battle with the Trump administration over $2 billion from the federal taxpayer in terms of long-term grants and contracts, short-term, but also short-term grants and contracts and the like, because the issue is whether or not Harvard is helping Israel enough. Apparently, allowing Uncle Tickles to roam around campus when he's also a guy who should have been booted off the campus 23 years ago for plagiarizing a book which is supporting Israel, literally titled The Case for Israel, is not being nice enough to Israel. Donald Trump, by the way, appears in the Epstein files at least 38,000 times. There was another release as recently as 2 days ago in which Trump is named more specifically as having had direct contact with underage girls in connection with Epstein. So this is very much the Epstein circle of espionage for Israel connected to financial crimes connected to Israel and connected to a blackmail operation involving sex with minors, American minors, for Israel's benefit. This is all wrapped up in one disgusting burrito. I think that you're getting a better idea of what should probably be happening here and what Harvard should be doing and is not doing. In part 3 of these videos coming up, we're going to switch from the Dershowitz sleaze regarding sex with minors, and we're going to pivot to the Dershowitz sleaze regarding his evident plagiarism when creating excuses for why ethnic cleansing is A-okay. Till next time, kids, remember to like and subscribe and comment and do all that stuff. Especially if you quote-unquote enjoy my content. Again, there's no enjoying my content, but, you know, till next time, kids, take it easy.